The former president of America, Donald Trump, received a hero's welcome today at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee as he made his first public appearance since being wounded in an assassination attempt. He was wearing a white bandage, and the former U.S. president waved at the packed arena and received a standing ovation from the cheering supporters. 2 days after the botched attack at the Pennsylvania rally, Trump made no remarks to the convention, which erupted in loud applause and chants of USA. Donald Trump instead stood alongside his newly announced running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, and soaked in the warm reception. Let's hear what he said.
Our presidential values and principles of our presidential nominee and be trusted to faithfully implement the will of the people. J.D. Vance is such a man.
J.D. 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 J.D.
A man who loves America and will represent our people with moral courage, strength, and honor. J.D. is a living embodiment of the American dream. He came from humble beginnings, and even as his life took him to places he might have never imagined, he never forgot where he came from. Ohio values are in his blood.
All right, so that is J.D. Vance, and as his name was announced at the Republican National Convention to be the running mate of President Donald Trump, there were chants of J.D. and of course his linkage to India that were also referred to because his wife is an Indian origin American. So there you saw J.D. Vance with his wife as the people cheered on. There are a large number of people, thousands, who gathered for the national convention. Now, J.D. Vance, who is the author of the best-selling memoir on what ails the white working class, Hillbilly Elegy, has an Indian connection. J.D. Vance, who is 39 years of age, is married to Indian-American Usha Chilukuri Vance, who traces her origins to Andhra Pradesh. Not just this, Vance branded China the biggest threat to America in one of his first interviews since being named Donald Trump's running mate. He also underscored the likely hawkish stance of the administration on Beijing if elected, and that China is one of the biggest enemies of the United States of America. Listen into what he said.
Missile systems, there are artillery systems, there are bullets, basic weapons of war that we are sending to Ukraine right now that the real enemy is watching. Because the thing that we need to prevent more than anything is a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. It would be catastrophic for this country. It would decimate our entire economy where the computer chips, so much of those are made in Taiwan. It would throw this country into a Great Depression. And right now, do you know that Joe Biden is not sending weapons to Taiwan, weapons that we promised the Taiwanese, because we're sending those weapons to Ukraine or elsewhere? How does that make any sense? Now, here's the thing that I am often confronted with. When people tell me that we can focus on Ukraine and Taiwan at the same time, they say that we have to show Putin that we mean business so that Xi in China will know that we mean business too. But the unfortunate fact is that Putin and Xi, they don't care about our chest thumping. They don't care about what we say. They care about whether we can make enough bullets to fight the war that we may have to fight.
Actually, not just talking about China. J.D. Vance also called India to be one of America's most important allies along with Japan. He tweeted on social media, and now as we move ahead with this discussion, we discuss about how J.D. Vance's foreign policy towards India work out the equation between both the countries. Let's start our conversation. Joining me on the telecast is Edward P. Joseph. He's a senior fellow, SAIS, John Hopkins. Thank you, Edward, for joining me on the telecast. And your first views about the Republican J.D. Vance being the running mate of President Trump?
Well, the surprise here is that Trump, after this dramatic assassination attempt in Pennsylvania, which Trump emerged, that this is a miraculous event. He emerges in this incredibly strong position, having come literally within an inch of losing his life. And then he has this dramatic appearance with holding his fist with blood streaming down his ear. He emerged from that episode in a completely strong position. And the surprise here is that he then doubled down effectively with Vance, rather than exploring the possibility of bringing someone in on his ticket who could, as we say in the United States, as strategists, political strategists say, expand the map. That is, help him in states where Trump could really use the help. One example is in Virginia, with picking the Republican governor there, Glenn Youngkin, as a number of Republican strategists suggested. That would put Virginia in play, and there are other figures who could do that. In other words, who could bring to Trump constituencies that he doesn't have. Whereas J.D. Vance is what we say doubling down on constituencies that Donald Trump already has. So that's the surprise here. It isn't that J.D. Vance doesn't have qualities for political qualities. For Trump, he does, of course. He's young. He has a great personal background, a story coming up from with this very poor upbringing in a troubled part of the United States that taps into a constituency for Trump. But the point is, those people are already with Trump. And his state, Ohio, is not in play at all. Ohio is solidly in the Republican camp. So that's sort of the surprise here, that Trump didn't go for a pick that would go out of his strength. Instead, he picked someone who's young and who can carry on the torch after this term, if Trump wins, would be over.
Edward, do you think, what about J.D. Vance and his India policy? He has spoken about, is this, could this impact the way India-US policies could move further? Bilateral ties could move further, keeping in mind his wife, incidentally, is of Indian origin. She belongs to Andhra Pradesh, and she's a Yale graduate and studied in Columbia. Talking about his statement that has also come in, talking about, he's spoken about how India, along with Japan, is amongst the most important allies of America.
Well, I think that's a very interesting point. And I think for citizens of India, I think should be very proud and should acknowledge that the amazing opportunities that exist in the United States, these are symbolic, because you have Usha Vance, who, as you say, is quite accomplished in her own right. They met at Yale Law School. But you have, of course, she would be the spouse of a vice president. In Kamala Harris, you have the vice president, who is herself the daughter of an Indian immigrant. So in Kamala Harris, you have the actual vice president who has the Indian heritage. And of course, you had other very prominent candidates, most notably Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, I think the takeaway here for citizens of India is not Usha Vance and potential influence, because the reality is vice presidents do not have much influence, and one expects that Donald Trump is not going to be listening to a vice president very much. I mean, so that's unlikely.
Fair
But
enough.
I think the takeaway here, let me just finish this point. I think the takeaway for citizens of India is the tremendous opportunity that exists in the United States of America for citizens of India, citizens of South Asia, and other parts of the United States, that the United States remains this incredible land of opportunity. And that's with this profusion of people recognize the talent that Indian Americans bring. And I think that's really something admirable. Please.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a land of opportunity, not just for people who are immigrants, who have made a life for themselves. Indians become the small percentage of population of America who are the most enterprising, the richest of the immigrant community that lives in America. And not to mention, like you already mentioned, Edward, that it is an opportunity, it's a land of opportunity for Americans themselves. The story of J.D. Vance, the fact that his mother was a drug addict, his father abandoned the family very early on. He was living with his grandparents, and today he's become the vice president. He's become the vice president candidate under Trump for the upcoming elections, and he's only 39 years of age. So that's it's only going to move upwards here on for Vance as well. Getting in Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor as well. And Ambassador, how do you view now? There are a lot of these, you know, I don't know if I may call them human interest stories. There are a lot of these snippets that are now coming out of the interviews that had been done by J.D. Vance and his wife, Usha, in the media some 2-3 weeks ago before the announcement was made yesterday. And there is this very big focus that has been put on the faith of Usha. She's spoken about how she's a proud Hindu, and she's very proud of having been brought up with the kind of values and belief systems by her Indian parents, by her Hindu parents. And so much so, she goes on and says that she was able to help J.D. Vance, her husband, in rebuilding his Christian faith.
Thank you very much, Megha. It was very interesting to hear the words of Edward, very profound, very thoughtful, and I agree with him entirely that the vice president here does not have that much of play in policy making or decision making. He is more in an advisory capacity, not in an executive capacity, really, if I were to term it in that way, unless the president actually and specifically asks him to do some very specific jobs. So to that extent, it is going to be interesting to watch the developments as we go ahead from here. James David Vance, as I've seen from his bio profile, has had a rather troubled childhood, and he has changed his name a few times also, from James Donald Bowman to another intermediate name, and then on to James David Vance. And his life was quite disrupted. So what I see as very significant milestones in his career progression is his moving on to Yale Law School and doing law there, which would have been a very significant milestone. And then getting married to Usha Chilukuri, who was also at Yale Law School. And from there on to also becoming a senator. Now, Usha apparently has been a very strong influence on his life, as he himself also says at various points. And he wrote this book, which is called Hillbilly Elegy. And even in that, it seems that Usha helped him a lot to sort of clear out his thoughts and his entire, story, so that it became a bestseller. It became a bestseller for 2 years in a row. And then it went on to become a successful movie also. So while she has been a very successful career person herself, as a litigator, as an attorney in one of the bigger law firms here, and litigating and working with very important Supreme Court justices, clerking with them. And now the family has 3 children, and she has great values in terms of her family values, in terms of her traditional values, in terms of her spiritual values. And she has brought a lot of focus, stability, and strength to James David Vance in understanding what a good person he is and in understanding how to move ahead in life. So that was apparent even from the interview that she gave recently,
Yeah.
where he spoke mostly. So it is very fortunate for James David Vance, after such a troubled life and a disrupted life to such a great extent, to get a stabilizing factor and force like Usha by his side, who will continue to be a very strong factor in his career progression. Back to you, Megha.
Absolutely. I have with me Professor Madhu Nalapat as well. Professor, how do you view the situation right now? Does it also now appear with the kind of campaigning that is being done by Donald Trump, and now, of course, J.D. Vance coming out in support of India and saying that, we have really close ties with India and they are only going to prosper further if the Republicans were to come to power. Can we assume that our ties can even better if the Republicans were to replace the Democrats in the elections?
Well, I'd like to say, Megha, that in my view, there's no doubt about that. Don't forget, Donald Trump himself announced that he will give a green card. First he said, Chinese and Indian students. Then he quickly amended that to say Indian students. So Indian students studying in the United States, he said, I'll make it very easy for them to get a green card, because he knows the importance of merit. Now, as far as J.D. Vance is concerned, the reality is that, so I don't think any problem is going to come to Indians. You may have a problem with undocumented illegals. You may have a problem with people who are crossing the border from different parts of the world through Mexico. But I don't think Indians are going to have a problem. Indians who are studying, who are working hard, and as a community in the US, they are known for that. Having said that, Megha, I also want to point out that the purpose of J.D. Vance as vice president was not to expand the voting reach of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has taken on that job himself. He has invited Nikki Haley, for example, to speak at the convention. He has talked about certain safeguards, some guardrails regarding abortion, and basically ruled out a federal abortion ban. There's no doubt J.D. Vance, as the vice president, will follow his example. His purpose was to ensure that the base remained solidly behind Donald Trump and came out and voted. Megha, when you have a situation in which the base of a party gets demotivated and doesn't come out and vote, well, then that party is in trouble, that candidate is in trouble. And Trump wanted to solidify his base, and J.D. Vance has electrified his base. And not only that, when you look at his story, Hillbilly Elegy, he's very open about the suffering he went through. He comes from a poor, a poor background, a poor white background, a working class white background, a farm, basically a landless rural background, a white background. And that is a base, I can tell you, it's very important for Donald Trump. He represents that there. He's not at all a wealthy man. Donald Trump is. He's a young man. Donald Trump is not. And you can see that he's married into a different ethnicity. And he's had no problems with that. Or raising multi-ethnic children. So there also, I don't believe that all the liberals are going to be desperate to avoid Trump, because Trump himself is modifying his position significantly on matters such as abortion. As far as immigration is concerned, what he's correctly saying, I am against illegal immigration of the kind that is flooding into the US. I am all for skilled immigration. We need that. So I believe his job is to basically energize the base. And I'd like to say he was the ideal vice president for that. So I think Trump has made an extremely wise pick in J.D. Vance. He's got tremendous energy, tremendous charisma, and I do believe he's going to appeal to a lot more constituencies, including the young, that are absolutely critical for Biden to hold on to. It's also critical for Democrats to hold on to a constituency that they've been surrendering to the Republicans. That is the poor whites, the rural and urban poor whites, working class whites who have been leaving in large numbers.
Okay.
And frankly, Vance is from them, and therefore he'll appeal to them. So I'm sorry. I think he's a very strong vice presidential pick for Donald Trump to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about the immigrant points and how the skilled workers from India to America are being welcomed with a red carpet by Donald Trump is only indicative of the fact that United States of America has been able to keep its replacement rate or the fertility rate at a somewhat healthier pace, percentage, because of the immigrants that come into America, which also allow for the GDP, the economy, to also then function at a fairly faster pace as its counterparts in Europe and China. Adrian, coming to you, and how do your opinion about these fast-paced developments that have taken place in the last 48 to 72 hours? First to Trump, the assassination bit, and now he coming a much more resurgently, a stronger candidate, maybe a sympathy wave coming in his favor, and now picking J.D. Vance.
Well, thank you for having me. And what you have are, a picture of two different presidential candidates. One's a sitting president who has trouble making it through a debate, and then you have another individual who's running for president who gets shot at, loses part of his ear, and then he shows up at the Republican National Convention. There's a message there. It's a very clear message. There is one person who is not, Biden has trouble getting through interviews. He has trouble getting through, and then he gets very forgetful. And then you have Trump, who, for a person who's over 80 years old, he seems very spry. He's out playing golf the very next day. So you have that. Maybe that's why he added a younger person to his ticket. I did pick up some interesting things that you mentioned. It was about Vance and China and the relationship with India. And I think this is something that we maybe kind of glossed over that is important here, is that U.S. can't do this alone. We're dealing with three adversaries here, three large adversaries, and I'll rank them in succession of strength. It goes from Tehran to Moscow to Beijing. And you can't deal with them one by one. You have to have a holistic approach to this. And now, dealing with a holistic approach means America can't do this all alone, and India could serve as a tremendous counterbalance in the subcontinent, in dealing with China, in countering the One Belt, One Road initiative through Modi's plan to have a different corridor going through the Middle East and up through Europe. So America, and I really hope this is the case, I've been saying this for years, I was in the outsourcing industry, so I may be a little bit biased before I moved into my current field, but India is where we should be doing business. It's also where we should be building up national strategic defense interests instead of doing joint naval ventures in the Indian Ocean with China and Russia at times, which we have done under the Biden administration, which is absolute madness for me. So that hopefully that relationship, and the relationship between Trump and Modi is a strong relationship, and I would hope that's one that builds and strengthens if Trump does get elected.
Okay, all right. I'm going to raise one more point, and this was also a speech that was made by J.D. Vance, and this important mention of China that was made. And Edward, he's spoken about how under the Democrats, under President Biden, the arms and ammunition and military support that was to go to Taiwan has more than reduced, and the focus that had to be of the American administration, of the American military towards countering China in the East China Sea, in the South China Sea, has been clearly diverted, and the focus now is on Ukraine. Trump, who has a very anti-NATO stance, who has a stance where he would rather not pull the strings and push the war in Ukraine with the help of NATO, and he has and the statement by J.D. Vance obviously goes on to show the Republicans' ideology towards South China Sea, East China Sea, towards protecting the sovereignty of Taiwan and countering the aggressor, which is China.
Well, I would say that here we have to be very mindful of the current administration of Joe Biden, and we have to see the actual record of the current president, because let's bear in mind that everything related to Trump now is speculative, because there will be an election, and we cannot assume that we know the outcome of that election. So there is a president, his name is Joe Biden, and he has a very clear record on China and on India. And that record speaks for itself. President Biden has strengthened the relationship with India, strengthened relationship with Prime Minister Modi, and he has strengthened the alliance against China, which is something that we did not see under the Trump administration. We have to remember that Trump came in and one of his first moves was to cancel the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have built an alliance of a trading alliance that would have been a bulwark against China. And Trump came in and tore it up, as he did on other things. You have to remember here, there's all this now euphoria about Trump and because of this dramatic incident. But we have to remember there's some very troubling questions about Trump, and incredibly impulsive, doesn't believe in alliances, does not believe in working together. That's not what Trump believes. Trump is all about America first, and we're going to do it our way, and that's not something that should be very reassuring.
Okay.
President Biden has a very clear record. Now, yeah, is he old and all of that? That's absolutely true, of course. But the record is the record, and we should not lose sight of that and be distracted, completely because of dramatic events and a terrible debate by Joe Biden, which was completely terrible. And we should look at the record and the policies. And the policies have been very strong on India under Joe Biden, and very strong with respect to China. And we have numerous examples of that. And he's built an alliance there, strengthened this with relations with India, with South Korea, with Australia, with Taiwan, with Japan. And when we let's come to this question about Ukraine. You have countries like South Korea and Japan, which are part of the coalition to support Ukraine against this Russian aggression. And no one should be fooled here that somehow, we're helping Ukraine, so that's ammunition that we need for Taiwan. Come on. You think Xi Jinping isn't looking at our reactions to Ukraine? You think that Xi Jinping and his advisors in Beijing are not every day watching to see weakness, looking for weakness in the American position on standing up to Vladimir Putin's aggression, and then knowing exactly what they could get away with in Asia, not just with Taiwan, but with India as well.
Yeah,
so you cannot separate these questions.
How do you view this? Fair enough, sir. Okay. Yeah.
Let me just finish here.
I have only about 25 minutes where I'm trying to accommodate all the four panelists.
We are throwing India under the bus. Please.
Okay. All right.
And Taiwan.
All right. Fair enough. Important points made over there by Edward. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, how do you view this? Do you think this narrative that is at this point of time being built by J.D. Vance is actually being bought by the Democrats and more importantly, by the public of America? And also the foreign policy is what the Republicans under Trump at this point of time are envisaging when it comes to China and when it comes to India and the Indo-Pacific region?
Sorry, is that for me, Megha?
Yes,
I got
yes.
dropped out
Yes, sir.
accidentally. What was the question again?
When J.D. Vance talks about how under the Biden administration, America is diverting its attention from China, the aggressor, and focusing on Ukraine, are the Republicans under Trump and Vance going to have a foreign policy that is going to side India against China and they focus more on Indo-Pacific than Europe?
Well, Trump during his regime did sign those fundamental agreements with India, 3 of them, and took the defense relations very strongly forward. And, on the aspect of Ukraine, the views of J.D. Vance are very clear. He has spoken extensively about it, how it's not a war which America needs to focus fully on it and, sort of deploy so much of resources towards it, but to try to see how to bring it to a quick conclusion, which Trump has also stated on numerous occasions. Now, vis-a-vis India and China, the past track record of administrations in the US on this issue has not been the best. They have not come forth in a very enthused or energized manner. I think what will be required for the next administration, whichever it is, to have the Quad more energized and activated. India also has to play a role in that. India has not been very proactive in that aspect either, but it needs to become proactive. Plus, I guess some sort of a direct discussion has to emerge between the NATO and the Quad and between India and the US on some sort of stronger defense partnership, which will not be an alliance, but which will talk to, sharing the common concerns and coming to each other's aid whenever required. So that sort of discussion and dialogue will be essential for US and the Western countries to engage themselves actively whenever anything happens on the China border. So far, that has not happened, and it needs to happen very soon.
Okay. Adrian, do you think Trump may have gained more popularity and perhaps potential votes after that incident of the assassination bid took place 48 hours ago? And in contrast, what Biden has been going through, gaffes after gaffes, him with the problem of stuttering and stammering and forgetting names and calling Kamala Harris as President Trump, in fact, and calling Zelensky as Putin. And if at all there was a change that was made by the Democrats to pick their Democrat candidate for the presidential elections, whether it is Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, it wouldn't matter till the time it's a Democrat who's standing against Donald Trump.
With the assassination attempt, you may find that Trump will receive a bump from this, and I think that's being shown out through polls. I generally don't trust polls. I'm sorry, I've got a noisy printer going on here. And what we're going to see from Biden is, I've seen this over the last 4 years, and Edward, I mean, if we're going to be honest here, we've seen, it's not just one interview we're talking about here, it's gaffe after gaffe after gaffe. And that's what we're getting from Biden. We have, I'm sorry, it's two different pictures here. And I want to push back a little bit. Yeah, the world is absolutely watching what we're doing as far as foreign policy. But let me turn back the clock a little bit. Why do you think Putin invaded Ukraine? Do you think he was watching Afghanistan and the Biden administration's Afghanistan withdrawal? How's that relationship with Israel going right now? That seems to be deteriorating with the withholding of ammunitions, with forcing a hostage deal down their throats, which Hamas was never going to accept, but continuing to pressure Israel to withhold ammunitions that's going to put them in danger from Lebanon, not from Gaza, from Lebanon. So, there's talk and then there's actual action. And the other leaders are sitting back. I'm not saying we need to put Ukraine in the rearview mirror. But there needs to be some clear objectives here. What are we fighting for? What's the goal? Is it to take back the Donbass? Is it to take back Crimea? What is the end game here? These are military plans with an administration that has had zero transparency foreign policy wise.
Okay.
And I'll go back to one last point. Let me just make this on Ukraine, on the eve of the invasion, when Putin was amassing all his troops along the border, Blinken, our Secretary of State, came out and said, ultimately, it's up to Vladimir Putin whether he wants to invade. That was the message. And Putin invaded.
Okay.
I'm not making this up. Roll it back.
Okay, all right. Finally, before I wrap this up, Professor Nalapat, again, I'm going to bring back the India focus. What are the key takeaways for India, especially with the development that has taken place and J.D. Vance being picked as the running mate for Trump?
Look, Edward has been talking about Biden's foreign policy. Let me say, from an Asian point of view, Japan and South Korea, frankly, were forced to supporting Ukraine. And you can see in the case of North Korea, some of the quote-unquote unintended benefits of that kind of policy, where security of South Korea is concerned. Japan is also going to feel the heat, and it is feeling the heat with these naval maneuvers very active in the Indian Ocean. The fact is the Biden administration is too Euro-focused. They want to drag NATO into Asia rather than create allies and strong allies in Asia. What has NATO done in Afghanistan? What has it done in Libya? What has it done in Iraq? What has it done in Syria? Hardly a record that inspires anyone. But Biden wants to drag NATO with him wherever he goes. He wants to drag the Europeans with him wherever he goes. Let me tell you, President Biden may not fully understand this, but I'm sure J.D. Vance does and Donald Trump does. Today is the century of, not of Europe, but of Asia more than Europe. This century of the Indo-Pacific, not the Atlantic. And it's certainly, Taiwan is way more important than getting back territories in Ukraine, which are impossible to get back, given the relative strength of forces. And who's helping Russia? China. And what is Biden doing about it? Sending emissary after emissary to China. Frankly, Xi Jinping is delighted by that. He's delighted by the war in Ukraine getting prolonged. The longer it gets prolonged, the better for him. The fact is, Megha, there are far too many people in the United States of America, including within the Biden administration, who are still focused only on a Europe and a Europeanist policy, and they forget that today the problem is in Asia, and the real threat is from China, not so much a very depleted power called Russia.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.